For the first time in my adult life, I am not quite comfortable listening to some of the things Rand Paul has said. Now, I think Rand Paul generally can be considered the intellectual heir to his father's, approach and thinking. Ron Paul's way of thinking. So Rand Paul, I've always felt, I felt comfortable with everything he said. I felt it was a really good way of thinking. Even when I was a Democrat, when I was a registered Democrat, I thought that. And then when I realized that I cannot be a Democrat or a Republican and I had to be an independent, I still thought that when I saw how crazy the two parties were and how crazy the two party system is and how perverse it is. Um, so r- even as a Democrat, Rand Paul. Rand Paul's thinking and approach and just general rhetoric resonated with me. It made sense to me. It made quite a bit of sense. But the things I heard yesterday in the congressional discussions on removing the war authorization that was granted, I guess, to the president at the time in 2002, George W. Bush, the war authorizations to enter Iraq, in discussing removing those authorizations, I heard Rand Paul say things that I'm not super comfortable with anymore. And the reason I'm not comfortable has nothing to do with Rand Paul, nothing at all to do with him. He's stayed the same. It's me and the world who have changed. So I want to briefly discuss that. Uh, the things Rand Paul was saying was this. This is kind of the gist of it. Yeah, guys, let's hurry up and get rid of this war authorization from 19 years ago. Let's get rid of it ASAP. But also let's get rid of basically every other war authorization. Why do we have military all around the world, all across the globe? We need to we need to get them out of here. We need to bring them back. We need to stop being involved in global affairs and global stuff. We need to bring our treasure back, our blood, our people back. Bring them back home, back here, and kind of fuck the world. Almost, but not quite. He didn't say that. Don't get me wrong. He did not say that. I don't think he would say fuck the world. But it was a tone of let's close our doors and let's be America again. Akin to some of the things that the US didn't quite do, but was thinking about doing maybe 120 years ago, where the Senate was kind of very focused internally. I don't know if it was exactly 120 years ago, but about between 75 to 200 years ago, in that period of time, there was some discussion about how the US should proceed. Should it be an open country and focus on expansion and kind of imperialism, or maybe a form of quasi imperialism? Where some people thought we should expand and continue expanding. And the idea of manifest destiny was an excellent idea as we move towards the west of the continent and the country, but that we should expand further and get more land and more resources for us. There was a group of people like that, but there was a strong group of people that were saying, no, we don't want to be like the empires of the olden days of Europe, like the ancient peoples. We don't want to be like that. We're a new type of people. We're in a new era. We're in a new continent. And we're a new type of government, a new type of way of being and living in this modern world. And we shouldn't do those things. And generally, America didn't do those things, right? You don't have Greenland as a state right now. You don't have us. You have us all around the world, but you don't have us like you don't have states and territories all around the world, similar to how Spain, France, Portugal, and the United Kingdom or Britain, how they um, how they acted and how they affected the world, maybe a century before to a few centuries before in their during their powerful eras. In the U.S.'s powerful era, we did something else. Of course, after World War One and World War Two, we definitely did expand our reach, our global reach, and we have now military presence all over the world. We have the capability to project power all over the world, and we have the capability to do so simultaneously, which is incredibly unique, unbelievably unique. The ability to project massive power in multiple theaters or multiple potential theaters. So we have immense power, and we're all over the world. We have military forces all over the world, boots on the ground everywhere, everywhere in Germany, in Asia, all over Europe, in Japan still, everywhere. And countries like China are finally beginning to expand in that sense as well. China, I think, has its first offshore or out of country military base in Africa, somewhere in Africa. And China's kind of the reason why I'm disagreeing a little bit with some of the stuff Rand Paul said. The things he said last night were very similar to all the things he said before. Were just the gist of it was, let's come back home. Let's come back home. Let's focus on us. We don't need to be involved in everything. We don't need to be the police of the world, which made sense for so many years. For so many years, it made sense. And pursuing that kind of approach could have been great for the US because we could have deeply invested domestically instead of just wasting and burning money and tossing it into other people, other places, and to big corporations, to the most powerful people here. We did that, and we did that for decades and decades. And it would have been smart not to do that. But now things just feel a little bit different to me. It feels like with China and the power of China and the importance of showing that a democracy can still do well by its people and do well by the world and be powerful and be efficient and be effective and be prudent and be direct and be speedy. Can a democracy be that way? I don't know. Can it? We want to show that it can. Can a republic like ours be that way? I hope. But if we're just going to pack up and come home, now doesn't seem like the right time to do it. It just doesn't feel right anymore because the threat is too large. China's not packing up and coming home. China's expanding. They're just starting to expand now. Their Belts and Road Initiative, the Belts and Road Initiative is so vital for their long term approach, their long term thinking when it comes to their region and just the overall globe at large. China wants to project power. China wants to be deeply intertwined with all the economies around it. It wants to be a US of Asia almost, and a different kind of US, the kind where decisions are made by a vast swath of people. Those people being in local politics, in state politics, in national politics, those people working in small businesses, medium sized businesses, and corporations, activists, students, people who care, mostly people who care, because if you don't care, you're not going to really be involved, but people who care from all walks of life in all types of organizations are able to affect the direction of the US. We have a very decentralized, very distributed system, very wild, interesting system. But in China, it's not like that. It's the opposite. It's very centralized, very centralized. And one of the questions of the 21st century is going to be which system works better in serving the needs of its people and in maintaining power and being powerful enough to remain a going concern. And if that answer to that question is the autocratic way is better, then that's a scary time for me personally, because I don't like the autocratic way, because I like the open and free way. That's just how I'm built. That's how my neurons are now, having grown up in the US. And but I heard about it from a very close perspective about the autocratic way, because my family and my parents lived in a country where things were autocratic. They lived in the former Soviet Union. And so I very easily, very just without even thinking too much, understand and see the negative aspects of an autocratic system and how it could be bad, very bad for everything that people generally care about, everything I care about. And that's far more than material well being, far more than that. But it can be bad for material well being as well. But I want it all. I want the material stuff and I want us to be still free. Can we have it? I hope. I hope. But I don't think saying we're turning our back to the world, and again, that's not exactly what Rand was saying. I don't want to mischaracterize this man's words, this patriot's words. I don't want to mischaracterize it, this honest patriot's words, because this guy is more appropriate and more decent than a lot of people who may be saying things that I agree with more. There could be people I agree with more, but I know they're not decent, good people. But Rand seems like a decent, good person. And so just this video is just about me exploring the question of just how things change. Things change quite a bit, and sometimes the solutions that worked in the past, or the solutions that we thought were going to work in the past, don't work anymore in this time. And so for the first time ever, I don't quite agree with Rand. Hearing his rhetoric, and hearing him keep repeating about how we need to come home and come home, it just, it didn't sit right. It didn't seem totally prudent. It seemed like it was missing out on some key assumptions. And that is that mainly one assumption, the one that says that in doing so we could still maintain our power. Or maybe there's another assumption at play. Maybe it's the assumption that power is needed or not needed. Maybe Rand would say, hey, we don't need that much power. That's not what it's about. It's about life and quality of life here, which is something I understand. But at a national level, I think the US needs to still be very powerful, and it probably needs to be the preeminently powerful nation in the 21st century. I think it's probably inevitable that the US will not be the most powerful country at some point, just because of our population. It doesn't seem like we're going to hit a billion people anytime soon. There doesn't seem to be the political or economic or social will to do that. So I think we're going to grow at an appropriate natural pace, not at a unique, interesting pace, like some people talk about, like the Billion Americans Project or the Billion Americans idea, I guess. That if that's not gonna happen. So probably we're gonna beat second place at some point. Probably it's just natural. So say one day we have 400 million people and China has 1.2 billion people. Say we increase a little bit of our in our population and China decreases. 400 million versus 1.2 billion. That's three times more people. Now, China's always had more people. 20 years ago, why weren't they more rich? Well, they were more rich because they didn't have our technology, they didn't have our capital. They just didn't. But they are investing heavily now. And they are going to have great technology and great capital. Basically, they're going to have technology to augment labor, which makes labor more efficient. It's very basic. And as labor becomes more efficient, everyone's quality of life improves. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you care about people in general, you should want the quality of life of everyone to improve. And I want that for the Chinese. But I also want the American way, the American approach to heavily influence the Chinese, to influence their government, to influence their way of life. In 100 years, I want to see a far more open China, where today no one in China acts like kind of in a way that I don't know no one, but most people, you don't see a typical Chinese person saying, "Oh, I care about my freedoms and I care about my freedom of speech, and these are things that the government can never take away from it." You don't hear Chinese people saying that in China. You hear that in the US, and you've heard that in the US for a couple of centuries, and that's a beautiful thing. In a century, will we hear the same thing from China? Will we hear a Chinese patriot saying, "Look, I'm standing up against my government, and I'm willing to physically stand up against my government because I believe in freedom"? The freedom of the individual first, before any government comes and tells us what we can or can't do. Is that going to happen in China? I hope. But it's more likely to happen if the US puts intense pressure on China, both at the political level up top and other kinds of pressure throughout the Chinese economy, throughout the Chinese culture, just everywhere, all around the globe. America needs to continue propagating its interests and continue I don't even know what that means, propagating its interest. It needs to continue propagating its overall approach, the best of the approach, not the worst of it, not the nasty parts of American culture and society, but the best of it. We need to keep pushing that forward, and we need to make other countries more open, more freedom loving, more tolerant. All those things are important. We want to see every country move towards more tolerance, more freedom, more human rights, more openness, more truth, more light, more human dignity, a deep respect for human dignity, and a true freedom. And we're not even there yet in the US. But China's definitely not there yet. And it may be going backwards with some of the things they're doing, nasty things they're doing, like with Taiwan, or especially nasty with the Uyghur Muslims. What they're doing to the Uyghur Muslims is just unacceptable, in my opinion. And it shouldn't be unacceptable to anyone. It should be unacceptable to Chinese people first. And the only way we're going to get to a more open China, and we need that. We need that. The US needs it as much as anyone else, as much as the Chinese need it, because they're going to be powerful as fuck. China's going to be powerful. Very, very powerful. And we want that powerful country, that powerful entity. We want that to be a decent entity, the kind where we trust and know that if we go there, there's going to be rule of law there. There's property rights there. There's a deep respect for human dignity and decency. Just a decency towards everyone, and a respect for the human condition, for the human, just the human element that sees the human as the end in and of himself or herself, and not just the means. That's new. That's a very new way of thinking. Only a few hundred years old. That way of thinking is only a few hundred years old. On every continent, it's new, especially on ours, especially in the US. Very new. Let's not take it for granted. It could not happen in China. It could not happen in other authoritarian places. These kinds of ways of thinking and approaching society. But additionally, it could also go away from here with the advent of AI and just this strange thing that seems to be happening in society, where we're trusting machines more, and a bunch of other factors that I'm not going to get into. It seems like we're moving towards a place where we value the human less and less, and maybe in 100 years that will be a romantic thought. The idea that the human is just an end in and of himself or herself. That may be just a passing fad, a multi-century fad. That's a very big possibility, but I don't want to see that, and I want to do my part in making sure that doesn't happen, both in the U.S. and abroad. It's much easier to do in the US because in the US we're now trying not to fuck things up. But for places like China and other places where we want to have a good influence, we need to approach it in the right way with love, compassion, and strength. Love, compassion, and strength. Those things will do well for us if we approach it in that way. If we push China to become better, more open, more decent. And I just don't think turning away from the world now would be the right approach. And 5 years ago, I would have said, yeah, let's turn away from the world.